just some buckles and stuff. I mean, it's honestly just some, probably over taking it a little too seriously, but just got like everything stealth stripped, and it never hurt me.
Way.
It's not, well, yeah, it hasn't always been that way. I just recently
put that thing down yet. So welcome everybody. We're going to get this webinar going here pretty soon. There's already 700 people in here and a bunch more piling in. So I appreciate you guys coming out to learn a little bit from Zach and Warb here and what they're looking for from a mapping perspective before they ever get to a piece of public ground where they're going to go hunt some turkeys. So they're going to shed a lot of light on the types of habitat they're looking for and how they go about approaching, hunts where they've never been before, because that's what they're doing all spring. But before we get into that, Zach, pick up that turkey vest and tell folks what you guys got going on here, because it's new to many.
This is our new vest. I guess turkey vest was the original idea, but we're going to be able to
mutate it into an all-purpose vest.
Yeah, and that's what's the most exciting for me. Is it's just something that I feel like, we can use it whether we're turkey hunting from the ground or saddle hunting, and there's even a different, like, more traditional, I guess, bird bag for it that can go on the back. So.
Yeah,
those that like that style.
You can see that.
There's Warbs.
Oh yeah. So tell folks about, like, where can they find them? I know you guys kind of have a rollout plan.
Can't find them yet. They'll be available next week. I think next Wednesday, we'll have them up on the website, and Tethered will have them on their website also. But
sweet.
Yeah, we're stoked. We've been working on it for like 2 years, so it's a long time coming.
Yeah, I had a chance to look at them at NWTF, and I mean, just the ability to customize them and make them fit your needs is pretty awesome, and something the turkey vest world has been missing for a long time.
I'm pretty stoked about it. I wore it a little bit scouting this past weekend, and it's just like, pretty much everything I was hoping. So that's always a good sign.
Heck yeah. Well, we got about 1,000 people in here, so we'll kick it off. Just some housekeeping to go over real quick. If you have questions that you would like to see Zach or Warb answer during the webinar, please throw them in the Q&A portion of your bottom tool tab there. If you just want to say, hey, I'm Bob from Louisiana checking in, throw that in chat. Or if you want to talk about what you're seeing as far as gobbling birds in your area, birds strutting, birds on trail camera, again, that's a great spot to put it in the chat. And then we will be doing some giveaways as far as some onX merch towards the end of this webinar. So that will be thrown in the chat as well here in about 30 minutes. But without further ado, Zach, Warb, I don't know that they need a whole lot of introduction, but I'll let them introduce themselves and kick off the webinar with what they're looking for from a mapping perspective.
Hey guys, I'm Aaron from THP, the Hunting Public. If you guys haven't seen us before, we're on YouTube and pretty much all the socials out there. So
all the socials. Zach from THP, and yeah, man.
Lots of questions already coming in. This is sweet. We're going to talk
turkey hunting.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk to you guys about scouting. The big thing we were talking about before we even got on here was we like to look for the limiting factor in an area. We've talked about habitat diversity in the past, and that's a key for turkeys and deer. But we like to look for the limiting factor. And one of these questions that's on here from Tyler was, what are you looking at in a state like Mississippi with a mixture of thick pine cover and open hardwoods? That is a really good example, and one that I was hoping to cover with the map here. I'll try to share this thing, Jared.
Yep.
See if this works.
Give her a rip. And just so everyone knows, yep, share looks good. Okay. This webinar will be posted to the onX Hunt YouTube channel tomorrow. So if you can't make the entire thing, or you got to dip early or whatever, it's going to be posted there. And then I'm also going to go hunt down the couple scouting YouTube episodes that Zach, Warb, and the THP crew have put together. And I'll post those in the chat just because there's some really good in-depth scouting resources from years past that are still super relevant. But without further ado, I'll let Aaron and Zach turn some layers on and show you what they're looking for here.
All right, so the question about Mississippi is a good one to get started. And basically, I've got a random spot on the map of the Southeast. When we're looking at the Southeast in general, most of the habitat is exactly how Tyler described in his question. It is tons of pines and tons of timber. That's not necessarily great for turkeys. I mean, that's not even what the native habitat down there was years and years ago. But without going off on a tangent about native habitats and whatnot, basically the limiting factor in the Southeast is hardwood creek bottoms. So what's really cool about one of the new features on X that I've been using and playing with a lot this year when I've been scouting in the Southeast, I've just got the satellite layer turned on here. But if I go up here and into the trees and crops and cover layer, and I go down here to acorn producing oaks, I've got them all kicked on in the details already, whites, reds, mixed. You can see just from the satellite image on here, and this goes for public, private land, whatever. I mean, turkey doesn't care. They're just looking for the best suitable habitat there is. So this is just your typical, block in the Southeast. As you can see, there's not like a ton of hardwood drainages and bottoms. And where you can see these lines on the map of red oaks and white oaks and whatnot, just hardwoods in general, oak trees. If we kick this over from the satellite view to the topo, you'll see that most of these are following creeks. This is common. This is something we see everywhere. Most of these are following creeks and streams of some kind. And the reason why they're there is because that's like the only area where they couldn't get in and start harvesting timber years ago. So all of these areas where there is no oaks, most of this stuff, if you really zoom in, is like planted pines. And turkeys will use some of that, but they really depend on these hardwood stands and these creek bottoms, not only for roosting, but for acorn production, all sorts of stuff. They love riparian areas that are in bottoms that are prone to flooding, because flooding causes disturbance over time. So in the Southeast, that's one of the things that we're looking for, are any sort of riparian areas where there is hardwood tree cover in oaks.
Yeah, and I think that plays along with, I think we did one of these last year, and one of the things that we started with was just talking about water. I think that plays a lot into what you said as well. If you flip over to that topo, you can see that there's a creek following those oaks. And a lot of times I think of it like those pine plantations are almost like ag fields or open country. So if you go up to the northwest of where we're at here, where you're in kind of the classic Midwest farm country, I think of a field as being pretty similar to these pine plantations. It's a crop, so it's almost like a crop field. It's trees and it's timber, but it's all just one forest type. But that diversity is going to be down in those creek bottoms, and to start, that's what we're looking for, like Aaron said.
Lots of unusable space for a turkey up here in these pines, especially at various stages of their life. So like a pine thicket that's 3 to 10 years old, for example, that doesn't have much canopy cover and that the understory's not being managed by fire, that stuff gets choked out and becomes very unusable for a turkey. So, I mean, there are the areas down there that are managed heavily for turkeys that have some understory thinning or fire going through them. Then they create more usable space within those pine thickets. And another thing that we're going to harp on a ton is habitat diversity. Like if we get into detail on this map a little bit more and we come down here, you've got these giant swaths of pines like Zinger's talking about and comparing them to crop fields of basically unusable space. But then you have this creek that runs over here. Let me kick over to the hybrid layer here. Got this creek that runs over here with hardwoods along the edge of it. And then you have some of these old clear cuts. Some of them are old, some of them are new. And then you have this stand of timber over here that's thinned. Then you've got a stand of pines over here. This is a ton of habitat diversity right here in this particular area. There are some open areas up here on top that look like they could be food plots or just road beds of some kind, logging roads. And then there's obviously the mature oak timber in the bottom. That's the limiting factor. That's like where we started, remember? And then we've got other clear cuts around there with various stages of vegetation growing in at various stages of succession is probably the right way to put that. And then pines over here. So you've got really a mixture of all of those habitat types converging in one spot. And I guess one of the other questions that kind of leads us in a different direction is, how do you hunt big woods environments where there is no habitat diversity like that? And this is something that we run into often, especially when you're dealing with giant swaths of public land. You might have tens of thousands of acres of timber on public land, and you would think that turkeys are scattered throughout it. But what happens more often is the birds end up in small pockets of that where the habitat is suitable, and they won't use large portions of that landscape. And Zinger, you can probably talk to him a little bit more about big woods while I'm finding some examples on the map, but that's one thing we're constantly running into on public, because the habitat, 90% of the habitat in some of these giant forests is not suitable for turkeys. So where do you think all the turkey hunters and the turkeys end up? It's like, well, all the turkeys end up in the 10% that's got habitat, and then all the turkey hunters end up in that 10%.
Yeah.
So
I think one additional thing that with that map that you have there's also little, side drainages and things that I feel like we've seen turkeys start to use more as pressure, closes in on them. Like early in the season, we've definitely noticed trends where birds are right there on those obvious creek bottoms, and they may end up roosting there even once the pressure starts, but kind of middle of the day after that initial, action first thing in the morning, they'll sometimes shift into a little pocket where they can get away from people. So I think that's a nice little addition to that. Like right there, I guess, Warb, to the southeast of where you are, as one that pops up to me too, even where there's a little bit of hardwoods within those pines, like right close to that cut. Yeah, like right up that little valley, stuff like that, anywhere where there's some of that hardwoods. And sometimes you got to get creative from that standpoint. But then as far as like big timber, I think that there's two things that are handy when you're looking at a bigger patch of timber. One is, again, water is going to create some sort of change. Like if you're in like rolling hills or in like up north and like northern Wisconsin or Minnesota, or if you're in like bigger hills in like the east or northeast, there's going to be a lot of dry ridges. But once you get down into those main valleys where there's actually a creek that's running all year, every year, that's going to change the soil type enough to where there's going to be some diversity there. I think same deal kind of goes for like in this example too, though, where you can see there's some pines, there's some, hardwoods, but there's a couple main creeks. Those are, subtle, diverse changes. And sometimes you can't see them from the map. I noticed, actually, I was just scouting for deer recently, and I just found a super dense patch that was in very monotonous timber that I couldn't see that on the map really at all. I mean, once I really got to looking at it, it's like, okay, I can kind of see it. But I think some of those places take a little bit of boots on the ground, but I do really, really like starting at water, because when you got water, you got a good chance of turkeys using that area year round. And that's always a good start, I think.
So Zach and Warb, looking at where you're focused on the map currently, obviously there is a pile of topography that we're looking at here. From that topography, are there certain characteristics, be it drawn out ridges with multiple finger ridges, saddles, little benches like just below the cursor there where the cursor is now? Like, what are you looking for from a topography standpoint?
There's a lot of things. A lot of these little fingery points and benches like what you're talking about out over this creek are what I initially think of, but it also depends on where the pressure's coming from. So like there's a lot of good suitable habitat for turkeys potentially in this creek bottom down below, but there's also a road down there. So if there's a lot of traffic on that road, especially in the spring, that may push gobblers up higher onto these ridges. If there's not a lot of pressure on the top and it's a good mast year, they may spend more time up there on the top. But I would echo what you're saying there. And that's one thing we find often when we're hunting in big hills like this is a lot of these little fingery points where where these fingers almost lay out like a hand above water. That's a really good place to start, especially if you can get above them where you can hear. Or the main thing, the tricky part of figuring this stuff out a lot of times is being able to get to a position where you can hear for turkeys. So this is so steep, for example, right here, Jared, you can see where it's bluffed out at the top. If you're standing on top of this ridge back in here, and there's a turkey just 150, 200 yards off of that point of that bluff, you may not hear him from up top because he's over a very steep bluff right there. Whereas if you're at the top of this drainage over here, like where my cursor's at there, you might be able to hear all the way down that thing. And then vice versa, if you're able to get across from it on one of these points to put ears on everything across the valley, you may be able to hear more that way. You always have to be thinking about how sound travels through the environment, because if you put yourself too high in really steep stuff like this and birds are on those benches like we talked about before, then you're not going to hear them. If you put yourself too low, you're not going to hear them if they're up higher. So that's what I like to do often. And it doesn't put you in the best situation to go and kill them immediately, but it might put you in the best situation to hear them, is to find one of these points where you can put ears on as much of it as possible, where you're listening basically across. It's not that far to get from this point over here to this one. As the crow flies, it's going to be a pain in the butt to get over there on foot, but you can at least hear a turkey gobbling across there.
And Ward, pull out the line distance tool and just measure that. Cause I mean, like generally speaking, what do you think? You can hear a gobbler 500 yards?
Well, hang on. This is blocking my tools. There we go.
In hills, I'd say in hills like this.
You can hear it.
If it's the right angle, I mean, mile and a
That's
quarter.
7/10 right there. You could hear him there easily if it was a calm morning.
Yeah. The other thing that I do a lot to kind of visualize what you're going to see and hear in the morning is you can rotate and kind of get on the level with the map. You can put it down there and then you can see the terrain, and it's like you can look at what you're going to be listening across the valley to. And I think this is definitely something that you just continue to get better at with more experience. Like, I'm sure that there's things that I'll do in the future that I'm not thinking about now, but I know when I was younger that little folds would mess me up quite a bit. Like maybe I'd hear one across the valley, but then I'd get on that ridge and then I wouldn't realize that, just a little fold would make a big difference and you wouldn't hear it. And then all of a sudden you're right on top of them. But if you can flip that map and look up into those spots just by sitting at your computer on your phone, that's going to help you kind of visualize what you can and can't hear, like what terrain will be between where you're listening from and where the turkey's at. And then another thing is don't be afraid to move. Like if you're not hearing stuff, just get into different positions to where you can hear different terrain, because a lot of times, there could be a bird gobbling all morning and you're never even gonna know it if you don't, you don't go get your ears on new terrain. So I saw somebody commented on there that said that property looks miserable, and man, I think it looks awesome.
It's awesome. I don't know where it is, but it looks awesome. The Zinger's point that he just made, like this pin, say that pin represents a turkey. I was going to switch it to a turkey, but for time's sake, I'll just use the pin. say that pin represents a turkey that you heard from 0.8 of a mile across that valley. Well, then you bail out of here, you go back to your truck and you drive all the way around, or you make it your huge loop and you get on this ridge system. When he was 7/8 of a mile, when he's on the roost, you could hear him plain as day over there. But then you get over here, the bird's on the ground and he's in a similar spot. But like Zinger said, if you're right here, for example, just over top of that ridge, you're only 400 yards from him at that point. You may not be able to hear him because there's a ridge in between you. There's another ridge in between you. And if he's falling off of this thing, you may not be able to hear him very good at all. We run into that problem all the time, especially with Easterns and timber, is if you're in the right situation, you can hear them from forever away. But then often you can get in situations where they're less than 200 yards from you and you've really got to strain to hear them gobble. They're just not going to blow your hat off every single time in every single situation. So consequently, a lot of people run turkeys over in the timber because they're not thinking about that topography and how it's affecting that sound and how it's traveling through the woods and even the direction that the bird is pointed. If he's facing away from you, gobbling down into this creek bottom to the west of this pen, then he's going to sound further. If he's facing you, he's going to sound way louder. So these are all little details that, you know, can play into it whenever you're hunting big wood settings like this. But as far as the areas that we're picking from a map, I guess, you know, getting back to it, when we're going into these big wood settings, oftentimes we end up close to the edge of public and private, where they may be doing some cutting, or if we're in a section of public where they are doing more cutting and they're doing more habitat management and there's less just monotonous closed canopy forest, we'll get into more turkeys there than others. But, you know, from a hunter's perspective on public land, you've always got that wild card in there of the hunting pressure part of it. It's like, would you rather have one turkey all to yourself in big open woods, or would you rather have 4 or 5 of them that you got to share with a dozen guys? So, and a lot of times that's what happens is if you go to the very best habitat, the most easily accessible spot, you're also going to be sharing those turkeys with a lot of other people. But if you find one just off the beaten path a little ways in a little pocket of habitat that's supporting fewer turkeys, you may have that one all to yourself.
Yeah. In addition, just for the sake of hearing something that I think is really helpful that you can use onX for is hearing a turkey, use your compass, point in that direction, draw a line to where you think he might be, move a little bit, do the same thing. And then where those 2 lines cross, there's a pretty dang good chance you're pretty close to that. And therefore,
if you hear him on that ridge and then you loop around and you get on this finger and you do that exercise he's talking about, you're going to have him marked fairly accurately.
Warb, show him what he means with that gobble triangulation as far as drawing those lines, because that is a crazy helpful tip.
Okay. Just give me a minute here.
In addition to that, to kind of, I guess, tell you how I approach it once I do that, is like, I feel confident that this is the spot. Like, we've got him pinned, and generally speaking, you can see the terrain feature that he wants to be on. Like in this example, he's close to a saddle where he can kind of just float probably back and forth on that saddle. And therefore, when I'm going to make a move, once I commit to doing it, it's just like, I'm going to go as fast as I can in a safe, spot where I'm not going to blow him out of there, but make a super fast loop and just go straight to, as close to where I can hear into that spot as possible. That way, you're not spending too much time if you don't have to. Now, every situation is going to be different, but if you don't have to spend much time, there's probably a good chance he's still going to be right there. And even if you can't hear him on the way in, just, knowing that, well, this is last I heard him, let's just get into that terrain feature with him and see if you can get ears on him again.
There's the example, Jared, if that makes sense. Like, there's your first lookout, and then you bail off, you go across the top of that big ridge, and then you go out to your next point, and you draw your line in there. And that just confirms, where he's at. And when you're in a situation like that, a lot of times you can get in a rush and bail off this thing and try to just get over there to him when you, especially early in the season when the woods are still pretty open, you might be better off just really pinpointing his location. That way, when you make that big loop all the way around and you're easing in on him down this ridge over here, you don't blow him out.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in this type of stuff is because you can't hear them with terrain between you and them, they can't hear you. So as long as you're going with terrain between you and them from where, you know, you have them pinned, essentially, as long as you're putting some sort of ridge or side hill or finger in between you and them, like a lot of times going up those little valleys is pretty handy, because unless they're standing there looking into that valley, you're probably going to be pretty safe. So
yeah.
Somebody just asked a question that I liked is how would you get to them? How would you get to that bird from all right, warbs all over it? So walk us through your thought process here, Warb.
Well, you're doing exactly what Zinger was just illustrating a little bit there. Like you're bailing off of that ridge and you're using the point of the ridge as cover. So we'll zoom in to kind of show that in a little more detail here. So this ridge, as it drops down here, that's a little spine right there. So you bail off this side of the spine, and you start dropping an elevation down to this creek, you're going to have that spine ridge in between you and the turkey. Now, granted, he's 7/8 of a mile away. Probably not going to see you anyway from there that far, but the objective is to get into the creek. So get down below where he can see. And then you get in the creek and you go across here. This is your kind of danger zone right through here that you got to be careful in. But most of the time in those creek bottoms, especially this one in particular, it looks like there's a decent amount of vegetation down there. So there's probably some scrub brush, some other things. It may be kind of thick and gnarly to get through, but that could be a good thing in this situation.
In that spot too, or in that spot too, like right as you come around that ridge, about right there, that's where you're going to potentially be able to hear him again. I mean, if he's still way up on top, you probably won't. But if he's moved down, for example, that's where I like to do another quick check. Not necessarily calling, because I don't want to get his attention, but it's like just a quick ear check, give it a couple minutes, listen. And, you know, if you don't hear him coming down the ridge, then you know you're probably safe to bust across that and get more terrain between you and him.
Yeah, again. I mean, you'll hear us just stop in the middle of the woods like every 150, 200 yards and just owl hoot, or just stand against a tree and listen for like 5-10 minutes. And then if the coast is clear, then we continue on up this thing. And I was thinking about going up this first drainage right here, but that's awfully close to where we pinned him at. And like, if he's right there on that little narrow saddle, just turning around, strutting and gobbling back and forth down and into these little bottoms, he may catch you coming up that thing. So I would probably play it a little bit conservative and go past that to the next one. You could do that, or you could even come straight up the spine of this ridge right here. The only disadvantage to that is like he's still got the high ground on you. So if you go around and you take this up top, you get essentially on the same level with him, just across one little drainage where you can locate again and potentially set up calling to that. Or you can use this knob to maneuver, or you can use this drainage to cut back up top and cut around him. You got a lot of options by using this next drainage down through there.
So talk a little bit about why you want to get the high ground on a bird, and you know what advantages that gives you.
Well, some people say that you can only call them uphill, and that's nonsense. They're going to go wherever they want to go. I mean, you can call them from down below, or you can call them up high. It really depends on the terrain situation that you're in. But, you know, in general, it's easier to hear from up high. And you know, you may be less visible in some cases by coming in from the top, especially if that thing is bailed off and he's on these little benches. You can just peek your head barely over that lip and you can hear him down below you. And then you can back off the lip a few yards, and then you can use that lip to cut around and move around him.
The other problem with being low is sometimes they'll just get to a point where they can see down to where you're calling from, and they're like, well, I'm not going any further.
Oh yeah, that's happened to us a bunch.
Problem.
Like we call one in and he'd come into 75 yards and just post up on the bench above us on the hill. and he just stares down there. And then when he leaves and you go up there and look at what he was looking at, it's like, well, no wonder he didn't come down here. He could see 200 yards. Like,
this is my least favorite thing in the world. So you're sitting kind of below the top, and he can get high ground on you, and then you see this one here.
oh yeah. Yeah, right over the ridge. Yeah.
You don't want that.
No, that's a major issue, is just ridge popping birds in spiny terrain like this. It's like, man, they rarely will just walk right out on the middle of an open ridge and take that open ridge right up to you. They'll use the topography to come in at an angle, and then they'll pop their head up like he's saying. And if they don't see what they're looking for immediately, they're getting the heck out of there. So it's real important to set up to remember that, you know.
And the ones that don't do that are dead.
That's right. Yeah. They've perished already.
Somebody else got them already.
Those are the opening day 2-year-olds that we love.
Yep.
Like getting those.
Well, sweet. I think we've got a pretty good grasp on, what kind of topography you guys are looking at in some hardwoods. Let's move over to some flatter ground. Maybe, Warb, I know you looked at a spot that was kind of in Rio country, or maybe somewhere in the Midwest. See what kind of habitat you're looking for over there.
Well, I mean, we could also, you were using that Montana example earlier too, Jared, where somebody was asking what turkey habitat looks like in Montana. And a lot of these areas for Miriams and Rios, I'll just grab Oklahoma here and head in. A lot of these areas, what's the limiting factor here? I mean, it's trees, just period. So it's like, instead of a sea of pine trees everywhere and all these big pine plantations, you just have massive open fields everywhere. And what you'll run into is, if you can find a riparian area, there's a creek right through here, right through the middle of it. I just zoomed in this random spot. I don't know if there's turkeys here or not, but there's a creek right through the middle of it here. And it looks like there's some mature timber in here along it. So that would be an area that I would focus on. I mean, it's pretty easy as far as that's concerned. And this is down in Oklahoma. I'm not really sure the tree types over here. It might be a lot of cottonwoods and whatnot. And that might be similar to what you're dealing with up in Montana. But if you're dealing with open country turkeys like Rios in Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, that's where you're going to find them. And don't be surprised, it doesn't take a lot of trees. Like, sometimes it just takes a few of the right cottonwoods that, 90% of the turkeys in the whole area will use to roost in. If you get rid of those trees, then the turkeys leave altogether, because that's the limiting factor in that part of the world. Like, there's Rios, for example, their hatches and their reproductive success, they boom and bust. I've learned this just recently, listening to, Chamberlain all the time. Rios have so much broodering cover out here potentially, because there's so much open ground. So if they have a wet spring and there's a ton of moisture in the ground, then they get lots and lots of broodering cover, tons of wildflowers and all kinds of stuff. That's especially true in Texas and really arid country down further south of here. So when they get all of that moisture, they have these boom hatches of like 3-4 poults per hen. And there's just Rios running wild everywhere. But then they'll have springs where it droughts and they don't even reproduce hardly at all. Like, hens will barely nest. So I guess what I'm saying there is, the limiting factor isn't necessarily brood rearing cover. They're more weather dependent than the easterns that we were talking about a while ago. But they've got to have water in drought situations. Once again, we're hitting on water. And they've got to have those mature trees like cottonwoods in a riparian area to roost in. And those you just don't find those all over the landscape. I mean, you're looking here, just massive pivots and ag fields everywhere. I'll kick the hybrid layer off so it's a little bit easier to see.
Warb, throw a public-private on as well. There's a couple comments in there as far as they were not sure how to determine public from private. So just kick that layer on. And something that you guys taught me years ago for my personal turkey hunting trips is just your guys's like day one and a half strategy. Zach, particularly you, like talk about what you're doing when you show up to an area you've never been to before, and how you're approaching your first day or so there.
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we all like to do is just get eyes on as much ground as possible, where whether you're deer or turkey hunting, just covering some ground, trying to understand what the habitat looks like in comparison to what you kind of dreamed it up to be when you were looking at the map. Like right now, we can make all these assumptions on, you know, what we're looking at right here, but until we're there, it's going to be hard to say for sure exactly what it is. And I think there's just so many things that you learn by doing that. It's like, actually, I was just taking notes about this because I feel like it's something that you could just do an entire webinar off just that. But it's, you know, you can obviously learn about the landscape, you learn about what vegetation is there, you learn hunting pressure, you can get a gauge on, you know, pull-offs and everything like that. And I think, I mean, the list honestly goes on and on. I have a whole lot of things that are in my notes, but just really being willing to do that and not feeling like, even if you've just got a couple of days, not feeling like you have to dive in there, you're probably going to set yourself up better for the time that you commit to being in the woods if you have an idea of what the best habitat in the area is like. So I just think that that's something that as time's gone on, we continue to see how valuable that is, to where, you know, if we can, for example, get to a state a day or two before season starts to do that, then you can jump right into it when season's open. So that's kind of another way to look at it as far as the strategy goes. And you may not always have that, but I think, you know, you may not have the time to do it a ton, but, you know, maybe get out and listen at first light. If you have, let's just say you have Saturday and Sunday, get out first thing Saturday morning, listen from the road, cover ground on the road, and then maybe you walk in somewhere mid-morning or chase a turkey, but then midday Saturday, instead of taking a break, you know, taking a nap, maybe you just cruise around and get eyes on property. That way you can set yourself up a little bit better maybe on Sunday as well. So, I mean, that's just been our approach, and I mean, definitely has helped us a ton over the years.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway that I was looking for there is just like, if I have 3 or 4 days to hunt, it's always been so hard to burn that first day scouting and just familiarizing yourself with the area. But the more trips I've gone on, the more success I've found doing that, rather than just getting right to hunting. As much as that's what you want to do, the more efficient and ultimately successful thing seems to be familiarize yourself with the area, find where other hunters aren't and where birds are, and you can put together a much better game plan with the, you know, the few days you have left.
I mean, we found places.
Good weather days too. Like,
yeah.
If you've got one great weather day, you want to make sure that you use that one to the fullest and get ears. That's what we're always focused on, is getting ears on turkeys, especially in timber. It's like, listen in the morning and hit as many different high spots as you can to put ears on suitable habitat from a map, and just drop pins on turkeys that you hear. And that first day that we're there, we may or may not spend a ton of time just listening to one bird gobble. We may try to find other options because we know that there's going to be other hunters in the area. So it may pay off, you know, 2 days down the road in an afternoon hunt, if we've got 4 or 5 birds marked and we're on option 5, but nobody's been in there thus far. If you're dealing with stuff out west though, like this, you're going to use your eyes because you can see forever.
My buddy Tom Ryle brings up a good point too. Like, if you're stopping at the bar to get a burger, ask your waitress if she sees any turkeys. You know, like, talking to people, especially in rural communities, it'll blow your mind how nice they are.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, use your local intel, like especially when you bump into like the guy that's like a seed salesman, you know, and he's traveling to these different farms. Like, those are the guys you bump into and you're like, see any turkeys? Right? That's that's a quality conversation there.
UPS drivers are one that have been
dude.
awesome.
Yes.
Well, sweet. We have about 15 minutes left here, and I want to address some of the questions that have come in that aren't necessarily map related. You can leave the map up or stop sharing it, whatever works, Warb. But as far as when you're closing in on a gobbling turkey, what is that bubble distance that you want to get to within to be confident you're going to bring that turkey to you?
Oh man, that's a hard one.
I don't want any hemming and hawing answers here, Warb.
That's a hard. It totally depends on the situation and where you're at. You can call them in on a string from 500 yards away if you're in the right spot. And then other spots, you literally got to crawl over a rock and shoot them at 30 yards or you ain't going to get them. So
I think I like to think of it as like trying to just visualize what he can actually come through. So, you know, that, like Warb said, in some situations, if you're pairing it with field and open timber, maybe that is 500 yards. But in other spots, if there's just a whole bunch of snags, whether that's down trees or the rock Warb was talking about or water, I mean, that bubble can vary so much. And I think as I've got more experience, gotten older, I realize how far you can call turkeys in some places that I thought when I was younger that you couldn't call them. And I think it just is one of those deals where, you know, you try to visualize, can he come to me? Can I come making him look in range and give her a shot? And then if it didn't work, learn from your mistake.
yeah, if you're in turkey sign, man, and he's gobbling a couple 100 yards away, you may not need to move.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if he's ready to go. I mean, it may take him a bit to come in, but the good thing about that play is that you can sit there, you can be patient and try to call him to a spot where turkeys already want to be. You can make a good setup. And then if that doesn't work, you can make moves on him after that. You can either hunt him later in the day, you can move on him. Everybody's always so worried that they're going to stop gobbling. But what tends to happen is by the time you get there anyway, if he's going to stop, he's shut up. However, you know, we've also had just as many hunts where the sucker doesn't move an inch and just stands there in one spot, and you got to figure out how to get over there on that ridge with him. And you've got to get inside the bubble that you're talking about, Jared. And that may be 80 to 100 yards, especially if he's got hens with him. You just
Sometimes that bubble's in gun range.
Yeah, sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. I know you guys have hunted quite a bit with youth turkey seasons and some kiddos for the last number of years. There's some folks asking about, you know, what tips can you guys give to make hunting with kids more, you know, make it a solid experience for the kid, regardless of the turkey action? What are some things you do every time?
I don't know. I would probably cater it to the individual kid and what they are wanting to do to have fun. Like if they're pretty impatient and they don't want to sit there and they're getting fidgety and they're getting bored and whatnot, you got to think of it from their perspective. Like, yeah, you want them to kill a turkey, but they're only 9, 10, 11 years old. Maybe it's funner for them to just walk around and look at turkey tracks and find a feather or whatever. I mean,
yeah.
And give them a turkey call to scratch on and something to kind of keep their attention, if you will.
Yeah.
Some kids will just sit there and hunt. Like they just are like, I'm not leaving until we get a turkey, man. They don't care. But some others are different. I mean,
yeah.
I remember when I got hungry, it was time when I was a kid, it was time to go get donuts, man. I didn't care if they were gobbling over or not. I was 7 years old and there was Casey's up the road. We got to go get some donuts.
Yeah, I think in addition, I mean, just I guess to back that as well, I think making it fun and making the focus not necessarily shooting a turkey, because you can't guarantee that. And there's a really high odds that a mistake would happen, like they're moving or they miss. So if the focus is that, you know, we're only going to be successful if we get one, then there's a lot of room for disappointment. But if you have just expectation that we're just going to go out there and have a good time, and again, like I think what Warb said is perfect. Like every individual is different, and I mean, even as adults, we're all different as far as our attention and what interests us. And you know, if you know the kid likes certain things, kind of focus on those. And I think also one thing that I always enjoy is taking, no matter what the age, somebody new into the woods, just over explaining every little detail, stuff that we take for granted as, more experienced hunters, like a track or, and it may not even be related to what you're hunting. Maybe you see a raccoon track, spend 5 minutes looking at that and talking about why maybe that raccoon was there. And I think those things really,
it always comes back to like, what are your goals for them, right? It's like your goal as an adult that's been turkey hunting for however many years, you want to go out there and shoot a turkey because you've been through this already. But your goal for a 10-year-old may be to turn them into a hunter. And that's a long-term goal. Like that's a process of multiple trips in the woods, doing exactly what Zinger just said. That's like learning what a raccoon track looks like, or what is turkey scratching, or look at this snake over here, or that's a bee's nest. Don't go touch that, and whatever. I mean, you got to think they're kids and you want them to grow up to be hunters. So honestly, that's what helped me is that we failed a bunch when I was a kid. We had fun, but we had fun while we were failing to get one. And then when we got one, it was like, holy cow, these things are real, and that was hard. And I want to figure out how to do it better. I've seen it happen where if you set everything up for them and they don't do anything and you put them out there and they kill a turkey in the first couple of minutes, it's cool. But some of those kids don't get the full experience.
I'd say that's setting it up is actually, in my opinion, pretty dangerous, just because it's like, then there's not like necessarily something to keep going for. There's not like a goal where if you go out and you just focus on those little things, you chip away at that stuff, and also making it pretty active too. I think that boredom is a real thing, and especially for kids. And I think that, as attention spans get shorter and shorter, it's like just keeping it active, keeping it moving. I think that's going to help kids stay engaged. And as soon as it's not fun anymore, get out of there.
Yeah.
I think that's a final good, thing.
Like it may take that turkey an hour and a half to come in, but if after 15 minutes he shut up and not gobbling and you guys are just, playing with sticks, it's like, might be time to throw the football around or something. Like
little pine cone baseball is
come back to it or whatever, find some mushrooms.
We're gonna throw the giveaway link in the chat right now, so that'll be live for basically just the next 12 hours. So make sure you click that giveaway link right now before you leave this webinar. Fill it out, get entered to win some of our new turkey shirts in Bottomland. They're pretty sweet, so that's what we're giving away here today. We'll cover maybe 2 more questions or so, depending on oh yeah, there we go. That but turkey. Just imagine it. All right, inclement weather, windy, rainy, some of the conditions that you guys face every single year. What are some of your best tips to get on birds in those inevitable crappy weather days?
I think back to that bird that we killed in Oklahoma, Zinger. It was, man, cold, wet, snowing even. It was just miserable. Like the turkeys were not gobbling at all. They flocked back up a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. There he is, right there behind his head. I mean, the one advantage to windy conditions is that you can move. That goes with deer and turkeys. It's like everything is moving in the woods. So, and you're not making noise because all that wind is covering your noise that you're making when you're moving around. So we may decide to just cover a bunch of ground and try to find sign and find tracks and whatnot. Sometimes, and you can still kill them in the wind. You just got to remember they can hear you from a fraction of the distance that they can when it's not windy. So using a glass call or something like that, or, a heavier latex mouth call where you can put a lot of pressure into it and crank on the volume, that will help. A lot of people don't call loud enough when it's windy, and that sound's only going 70 or 80 yards, just about as far as you can see, and you got to get it beyond that. If you're going to strike one, they'll still gobble in that, but man, wet, cold, and windy that's hard. They don't gobble much in that. So if you can get eyeballs on them, that really helps.
I think in addition, if you've got any amount of terrain, which everywhere does a little bit, just getting down in any low spot you can find, or like in a rain day, maybe that's where if you're in the Southeast in these bigger pine stands where you've got a canopy, they might be right on the edge of that, kind of hunkered down a little bit because that's where it's comfortable. So kind of thinking along the lines of where would a turkey want to be in these conditions, like rainy days, pretty open stuff, open bottom where they're not brushing up against stuff and getting more wet. And then in wind, just looking down in those depressions, taking it, that's where in turkey hunting, you would pay attention to which way the wind's blowing that morning. If you know it's going to be windy, maybe you take a little bit of time to look at the wind that morning, kind of visualize where you could go to get out of the wind. And that's where you look for the turkeys.
Love it. All right. Last question. Do you guys hold any merit to where you see turkeys in the fall? I mean, you guys spend more time in the deer woods than arguably anybody else I know. That's for sure. Do you guys hold merit to where you see turkeys in the fall and expect them to be there in the spring?
Sometimes.
I'd say it doesn't hurt to keep that in mind.
They don't range near as far often as a deer will. So if you find turkey scratching or turkey sign in the winter or in the fall, that might be a pretty good spot to start listening come spring. They may not be in that exact spot. In fact, there's a good chance they're going to move around, and the flock dynamics are different in the spring than they are in the fall and the winter. So where you're catching big swaths of scratching from big winter flocks or late fall flocks, by springtime, all those flocks are busted up, and you got a gobbler over on this ridge, and then 700 yards away, you got another one over here, and there's a hen nesting in between them, and turkeys are just kind of dotted across that landscape. But yeah, definitely. Anytime where we find turkeys, any time of the year, we're paying attention to that, I would say.
Right on. Well, we'll throw the giveaway link in the chat here for the next 30 seconds before we close down this webinar. But Zach, War, really appreciate you guys hopping on, sharing some knowledge, and best of luck this spring. Looking forward to watching the turkey tour, and best of luck to all you out there still on this call. Appreciate you coming out and sharing the evening with us.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys. Get out there and get them.
Yep. Good luck.
See y'all.
Thanks, everybody.